The time is just gone 11 minutes to 10 as we continue with the broadcast this morning. And it's time now to pay tribute to the late Marhoom Dr Farouk Meer, rahimahullah, being described as a man of courage. And historian and author Ghulam Wahid has written a wonderful tribute and many other tributes that have actually been flowing with regard to Dr Farouk Meer. And we know that there will be a memorial that will be held in Durban on Saturday, the 5th of August. And he is described as a patriot who gave all his life in pursuit of a just society. Alhamdulillah, we've also learned that he asked and is buried in the same grave as his sister Fatima Meer and her husband Ismail Meer in Brook Street, Durban. So all of them, the struggle stalwarts, alhamdulillah, contributing greatly towards the democracy of this country in one grave. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fill their qabrs with nur, inshallah. That is our dua. And also at the same time, our condolences go to the family, to the Meer family. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you sabr, patience at a time, the passing away of any member of the family, and no matter who they are, no matter at what age, and also at the ripe age of 85, alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took Dr. Farouk Meer in his mercy and paying tribute to him. This morning is the chairperson of the South African Muslim Network, Dr. Faisal Suliman. Faisal, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh and welcome.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Inayat, and jazakallah for the opportunity.
Yes, obviously, Faisal, you in the part of the world where Dr. Farouk Meer resided, and I'm sure you've had an association with the Meer family, and just looking at Dr. Farouk Meer, rahimahumullah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took him in his mercy on Saturday. But there's just so much one can actually say about this patriot, the struggle stalwart. Ghulam Wahid talks to him about a man of courage.
No, absolutely. First of all, let me echo your sentiments, and as SAMNET and as I think as a Muslim community, even as the Islamic Medical Association, to pass on our condolences and our duas both to the Meer family and also to the Pahad family. They saw both Junaid and Isub in the recent past, return to our Creator. And we knew Junaid pretty well, Isub more, Junaid in a social context and Isub in a political context. But these are stalwarts. It's about principle. You mentioned Farouk Meer, and when you had asked me to when you called yesterday to say, will you come on and say something? So I went to the book, perhaps it's the same one you're looking at, that SAMNET had asked Ghulam Wahid, who kindly did this for us. And I should again reiterate at no cost. The book called Muslim Portraits, the anti-apartheid struggle. And I'm just looking at the opening where he, maybe I can read it just now, where he quotes Farouk Meer. We talk about servant leadership and we talk about sacrifice. Now, just before this, we heard about this dire situation in Yemen. And when we reflect on where we are, the challenges that face the Muslim community locally, internationally, even on a global scale, we have to look back at how we're going, what sacrifices are we prepared to make? Because that is essentially let me give you an example. A few days ago, we had the AGM of the Durban branch, Islamic Medical Association, and new executives been elected in. And one of the stalwarts was talking about how when they started, we talk about sometimes why are younger people not joining the organizations? Why are younger people not coming to meetings? Whether it's Islamic Medical Association, you'll hear people from the other NGO saying the same thing. I know in terms of SAMNET as well. It's a lot of the older people. And it begs the question, what are we prepared to sacrifice for what we want? In our country, clearly, it's a huge question in terms of politics, in terms of religion, the LGBTQ. And so when we think about Farouk Meer, and I was looking at the tributes in this and other newspapers, it's about having given up your time. That's what it comes down to. Giving up your time and making some personal sacrifices. Sacrificing some material gain, sacrificing going and playing sport, sacrificing time with your family, sacrificing a lot of comforts and very often sacrificing money or earning less because your time and energy is spent elsewhere. And that summarizes a lot of the struggle heroes, including Marhoom Farouk Meer. That in terms of his medical practice, clearly, when Farouk and them qualified, there was a dearth of doctors, dearth of anesthetists, Muslim anesthetists, Indian anesthetists. They could have very well went down just the financial route and earned a lot more than they would have earned just purely, living the social life, earning a lot of money, being in high society, traveling the world. But when you look at the biographies, when you look at the stories, and you see the kind of sacrifice that they made, especially time, and in often cases, the family takes the brunt. The children don't get the attention they should have had because the parents were so busy. Um, in this case, in political work, having when you look at the pedigree of this family, and who Farouk would have met from the young age. Ghulam talks about in this book, from a young age in their home were coming the Sisulus and the Mandelas and the not well initially Dr. Dado, Monty Naika, etc. And then you get groomed. The conversations on your table decide whether you become a crazy, about football or about sports racing, or whether you get groomed towards maybe the akhirah, or in this case, awareness to do something about an unjust political system, whether it was apartheid, whether it was British imperialism, etc. So maybe that is probably the most telling thing we need to reflect on. And I'd like to, and in fact, if you don't mind, I'd like to read this to the listeners and the viewers
Yes, sir. Go
from
ahead,
this book.
Faisal.
Yeah, so just open quote. So there's always a tongue-in-cheek guy who will tell you, you know what, the guys who collaborated with the apartheid South Africans are better off today than you are. So didn't you make a mistake? And then, of course, this Farouk Meer Singh. And I say, no, we made a principled stand. That was the correct stand. I think if my organization, and he reflects in the meaning to the ANC, my organization today is letting me down and promoting collaborators and marginalizing people like myself, I'd say, well, tough. The correct thing to do at that time was to do exactly what we did against apartheid. And if history had to repeat itself, we'll adopt the same attitude, the same strategies as we did in the past. Now, this was talking about when the transition was taking place and the old tricameral parliament people, the old Bantustans, were all being incorporated into what we now will refer to as the new South Africa post 1992, 1994. And he spoke about principle. Clearly, it was a very painful time for a lot of people to see, the collaborators, as we call them, when we were younger, pre 1992, who had joined the system, being incorporated into it, and even given positions, even being made parliamentarians, old tricameral parliament, etc. Similarly, now post BEE, Farouk spoke about it as well, about a small elite enriching themselves. And the point he makes is about principle. And this is the crossroads we face today. I was approached the other day to say, we need the help of the Muslim community in the 40 years celebrations of the UDF that are coming back. And I said to the people who approached me, right now, if I tell people about the ANC, I can't repeat what they, what the words people use. And rightfully so, given what has happened. I don't mean the expletives, I mean the principle. And yet, we are at a huge crossroads, and we need to think in terms of principle. What would these stalwarts have said today had they been in their prime, full of energy, full of principled ideas? Where are we at the moment? Because clearly, as I'm sure you've covered and all of us know, the prospect of national coalitions loom on us. What principle stand is the Muslim community going to take? At the moment, you even tell people to listen, go register to vote. We're not saying who you should vote for, but put yourself in the stadium. Whether you join the race is no use. If you're not even in the stadium, How can you possibly even join in the race or have an influence on the race? And people are just so apathetic. So all of the work that the stalwarts across all religions, all races, all of these anti-apartheid struggle that fought for us to have both the luxury and the pains of where we are comes to naught if we, by our apathy and choosing to get ourselves involved in more mundane things, um, just decide to step aside and not get involved. That is probably the greatest disservice we do to people like Farouk and his sister and absolutely everybody, no matter what capacity. Some people were named, others were not, others made huge sacrifices, but were not in the forefront, quietly at the back, like every other organization. You know, SAMNET has people working in the background, your technicians, your studio, your producers work in the background, unknown. Like this is how it works. One or two people get the limelight. But if we don't, then all the nice things we say come to naught in it. If we don't, as a community, sit back and ask ourselves, what are the challenges both within our community, politically, locally, globally? I mean, Yemen is starving, and the same Saudi government is busy buying up golf, offering one player 700 million rand pound contract for a year when Yemenis are starving, and we are silent. Are we also afraid of a woke culture? Are we afraid we won't get a Umrah visa or a Hajj visa because you chose to speak out? Are we silent, against Modi because we worried we won't get a visa to go to Nizamuddin? So really, it comes down to what Farooq spoke about in this quote is about a principle, and it comes down to what all of these people did, giving up some of our material day-to-day comforts. Now, we are clearly not saints. I love a good football match. I have an interest in one or two teams, but it has to be at the periphery. It cannot be the core of who we are and what we are. Not religiously, not morally, not as patriots, not as citizens. That cannot be our core, not spiritually. So for me, in as much as, I mean, clearly we can speak a lot about Farooq, all the sacrifices, the NIC, NAMDA getting involved in forming a medical association that was parallel to the well, today we call it the HPCSA, that time the South African Medical and Dental Council, because those were basically apartheid structures worried about the interests of white doctors. Going out and inspiring people, etc. Making the sacrifices, going to jail, being put in solitary confinement for 3 years. By the way, the portraits book, of course, we'd love people to have bought it, but it is free online. If you Google it, you'll find the entire thing on a PDF, and it's no problem. We're quite happy that people read it. It's free if you download it. Some fascinating biographies there, thanks to Ghulam Bahed. So those things that we can talk about, the sacrifices they made and what they gave up in terms of all of the things I mentioned, come to naught if we don't sit back and reflect. We often in our masjids, we often on big night lectures and on radio stations, etc., talk about clearly as Muslims, our aim is the akhirah, our aim is our spirituality. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put an obligation on us here. This is our test: social justice, principle, right and wrong. The 5 farad is not enough. So that probably would be what I would say, something for us to think about. Let me use another example, and it's going to cause us huge problems. And that is the entire, transgender LGBTQI issue. Clearly, the Muslim community principally is going to come at odds against some of the very allies, who will join us in a Palestinian march. Some of them because of the woke culture. People are afraid of funding. I know Christians, doctors, pastors who have told us they can't talk because funding to the church will stop. They'll be woked out, right? University people have been silenced into collaboration, into acquiescence. That is going to bring us at odds with a lot of people who were previously our allies in the political movement, and If that's the principal stance we have to take, that is what we'll have to do. Certain things, there's a red line. But how we navigate those challenges, how we still keep alliances, notwithstanding our difference on that matter, whether it's the homosexuality, transgender, mutilating your 12-year-old's body because someone has put in his or her head that, you actually from the opposite gender, etc. Those are huge. We're talking about the breakup of society here. And more importantly, well, just as importantly, on our horizon is an election with substantial consequences. 98% of us are not emigrating, don't have the money, don't have the will, don't have the energy, don't have the resources. We are here. And if we don't organize ourselves, we do a huge disservice. We are literally giving 20 or 25% of the voters the power to choose 75% of what happens. And that is simply by being shut. And that is the greatest disservice we do to people like Farouk Meer.
Well, definitely, Faisal. In fact, talking about the greatest disservice to Farouk Meal, the whole idea is also about his legacy, preserving his legacy, preserving the principal stances that he has taken over a period of time. You spoke about the tricameral parliament, you spoke about the UDF. These were structures that he was at the forefront of, and these were the principled stances that he had taken. But not only that, he possessed the wisdom, he had the foresight as well. And again, looking at this fountain of wisdom that he was, looking at future generations. He's been a pillar of strength, not only to his family, but to the entire South African society, to society at large. And this is a legacy that he's left behind. And I know you've addressed some of the issues like LGBTQ, some of the internal issues within our own societies, but this legacy for future generations, if we don't take lessons from the life of Dr. Farouk Meer, we are going to be obviously looking at a disservice not only to him but to ourselves.
Oh, no, absolutely. Clearly, we all thought those who joined the tricameral parliament were collaborators. They were, Uncle Toms, etc. Farouk, and an entire generation of anti-apartheid activists clearly spoke out against this. They worked at the grassroots level, and that is without the benefit of all of the tools we have today. You had landlines, and you had basically that was about it. And that too, you don't know who was being tapped, who was an infiltrator within the parties, and who was spying. And within those constraints, not the ability for us today to be able to communicate so easily and form a WhatsApp group and plan and organize and all of this, literally gave up hours of their lives and time to go and do the very things, as you say, work on the ground, mobilize on the ground, conscientize, inspire. There are generations of activists. I looked at the tribute, from the Meerbank activist group, who speak glowingly how it was Dr. Farouk Meer who came and rallied them, inspired them. And I might as well say this. It's obviously not the same, but I remember in the late 1980s when Imam Ahmad Qasim and Allah give him Jannat as well came to Wits and spoke to us. People talk about Fazlur Rahman Ansari, Dr. Ahmad Al-Qadi, people who came to South Africa and inspired the MYM, inspired, formation of the IMA, etc., who left indelible marks. People who you sat with in their company for an hour and you were inspired. People talk about the aura of Muhammad Ali. Clearly, we're talking about contemporary, and we're not talking about Muslim leaders from the Salaf. But Farouk Meer did the same thing in his capacity when he spoke to young people. You just have to look at some of the tributes from people who knew him, who sat around him, who listened to his logic and his arguments. That medical training, that sense of intelligence transformed into a political sphere, into rational arguments. Not, today you see on WhatsApp groups, childish arguments, the woke culture. This is not how they inspire generations. And maybe that is what we need. Maybe we need those, the type of Farouk Meer type of people who can go out and rejuvenate our communities. Because at the moment, I think that is lacking, and that is why we are like a ship adrift at sea, without any focus, without an anchor, just the community floating along, directionless. In fact, within the ship, factions, the first floor, the deck fighting with the first floor, and the engine room fighting with the captain. That is where we are. But uh, and that is perhaps what we're lacking. That type of inspirational leadership that just brings people out of the slumber of getting, and it's infotainment, it's social media. It's much easier to sit at home and watch movies and play on your phone the whole day and get into WhatsApp groups and all of these things. Then it is actually to go out and do groundwork, at the base. And maybe that is what we need to go back to. What people like Farouk, Allah give him Jannah, did
I mean,
grassroots work.
well, Faisal, I think, obviously that is also important, but in terms of looking at us internally, but also looking at Dr. Farouk Meer and looking at the broader South African community, the broader South African public. And I'm sure, coming from a minority group, sometimes what we find is the majority don't appreciate people like Dr. Farouk Meer, or they have very little knowledge about people from minority groups like Dr. Farouk, who played a huge role, a massive role in the struggle towards liberation in the country. And for them to appreciate that there was this massive contribution that came from individuals like Dr. Farouk Meer, like Dr. Dadu, like many other struggle stalwarts. And I think there is very little. When you're looking at the current generation, the new generation, perhaps yes, amongst the ANC, the stalwarts, they would recognize the achievements and the contribution of these people. But looking at the new generation and future generations, all of this could be lost. And that, I think, would be very, very sad.
Oh, absolutely. And tonight is a different conversation about the Africanization of our history and the marginalization of minority communities and the roles they played. One just has to look now at what has happened to the ANC. The non-racialism project, look, for all practical purposes, only there in theory. I don't think we can hide and play around that. Non-racialism seems to have been abandoned in everything but slogans and theory. Sadly, it is not only the majority who don't know this. One of the reasons why I had asked Professor Bahed to do the book, and it was always our intention to do another edition with people that really couldn't have been covered in the first book, and in the style that is done, it very short biographies, not heavy reading, is that it to serve as a reminder, just to get our people to, and our own generation, my own children included, and I'm sure anyone who is born after probably 1990 know very little about the history, partly because it's not covered. Even June 16th, Sharpeville Day, Soweto Day have become more about sloganism, and that's about it. People go about their daily lives and have a braai, etc. Even the rallies, the ANC rallies have decreased. I notice in numbers when the president speaks. You have to choose smaller stadia to make it look full, for a whole lot of reasons. But the younger generation across the board, irrespective of race, educational level, just don't know the past. And to be quite frank, when you speak to them, don't care about the past. It is what is today, what we can do. Clearly, the huge emphasis on making money and getting involved in sort of more the materialistic sort of thing, a hedonistic culture. So to answer your question, maybe the question we should be posing is, how do we reinvigorate? In fact, I'll give an example. We donated the copies of this book to all the Muslim schools. And we said to them, maybe, in the run-up to June 16th, take an extract, ask your teachers to do one person's biography. In the run-up to Women's Day, look at one of those Muslim women in here. And it doesn't have to be from this book. You can be, from anything, any source. Talk about that Muslim woman in your school in a run-up just before Women's Day, just before June 16th, just before something else. That's the only way. Clearly, it's not going to happen in madrasas. The other avenues are, avenues like yourself, perhaps, a book reading on all our great Muslim stalwarts. known and those not so well known, a 5 minute snippet every day, at a peak period, just a short biography on these people, just to raise awareness, just to raise the consciousness. And if 1,000 people hear it and 10 people are inspired to take on something and to get involved, alhamdulillah. We make the effort. As we say, hidayah comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And maybe that is a way to address what you're talking about, the lack of knowledge of history, the lack of awareness, not only of the sacrifices, but also what it took to bring us to the comfort and discomfort levels of where we are. But more importantly, how we can take these people's sacrifice and example to go forward in our own political sphere. Because clearly, if we remain apathetic, what Farouk Meer and them sacrificed for is just going to go down the drain.
Well, Faisal, I know you've got patients to attend to, and we need to wrap up. But as always, we do appreciate your time. Jazakallah as always, and we wish you well. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakallah khair. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah, and thank you for the opportunity.
Dr. Faisal Suliman was us this morning, paying tribute to the late Marhoom Dr. Farouk Meer, rahimahumullah. And we make dua once again that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant him Jannah, Allah grant him forgiveness, Allah fill his qabr with nur, and at the same time, our thoughts and our condolences, our du'as go to his family, to his wife Rashida, his children Nadia, Razina, Siad, and Bilal, the grandchildren Suhail, Samir, Mika, Daniel, Danielle, Khalil, and Zaki, and also great grandchildren. Alhamdulillah, he has been blessed with Jahan and Ruhan, inshallah. Our du'as go with the Meer family. And with that, I'm going to wrap up from myself and the team until we meet tomorrow. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.